Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. Okay. Are you, if you, I think most everybody that's with us tonight has already been with us on the first lesson. So you'll see that I've got the standard overall view of the book here that I normally use. And then these are the dates that are important for the understanding of Isaiah. I've got three slides there, as you saw. And so let's go ahead and begin with the first verse here. The word which Isaiah, son of Amoz, saw, concerning Judah and Jerusalem. It will come to pass in the last days that the mountain of Adonai's house will stand firm as head of the mountains and will be exalted above the hills, so all nations will flow to it. Then many peoples will go and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of Adonai, to the house of the God of Jacob. Then he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For Torah will go forth from Zion, and the word of Adonai from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and decide for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, nor will they learn war anymore. Come, house of Jacob, let us walk in the light of Adonai. Now, one thing there, that those first 5 verses there have given rise to, I don't even know how many songs. I was just as I was reading through that, I went through in my mind at least a half a dozen different songs that use those scriptures. So those scriptures are pretty well known in the Messianic and possibly in the Christian world too. So so what do we have here? We got Isaiah has introduced himself again as once again, he said, I'm the writer of this book. Now, what is kind of interesting here, people wonder, well, why did he say that? Because normally a writer, one of the prophets, would introduce, or he would introduce himself in the first of the book, and then you might not see it again for several chapters or so, because then when he starts a new revelation or a new vision or whatever, then he would then introduce himself again. And so the point here, I think, is that he's just reiterating the point that he is the writer of all of this. He's not going into anything new or anything like that. So anyway, Isaiah's reintroducing himself, and what we have, what's kind of interesting here is the wording that he uses. That he says the word that Isaiah saw. Now, you normally the word that you hear, but now it's the word that he saw, and so this indicates to me that what he's talking about here is a vision and a revelation that is actually played out in front of him in his mind. And so verses 2 to 4 there, they are really they're a striking difference from what we saw in chapter 1, and we also see that these words are almost an identical prophecy from Micah 4 and verse 1 and 1 to 3. And so we don't know whether Isaiah quoted Micah or Micah quoted Isaiah. or they both quoted from something that was written by someone else, that it was, common knowledge or a common prophecy in those days. But we can still say that they wrote everything under the inspiration of the Ruach, of the Holy Spirit. So the last days phrase here, it describes a distant, way in the distant future, and we don't know exactly when that's going to be, but it's probably going to be we look at it as being in the millennial age, once the return of the Messiah and he sets up his rule on earth. Because we haven't seen this, the things that they're describing here and talking about here have not come to pass anywhere. So it's going to have to still be, in our own future. We haven't seen it yet. And so when it talks about the mountain of Adonai's house, that is in reference to how that Israel and Jerusalem will be basically the center of the world at that time. And we don't see that at all today. It's not the center of the world unless you're Jewish, and then it would be the center of your world. But we do know that in those last days, in the millennial period, then all the nations will be required to come and give an offering to the Messiah, to the ruler, during the Feast of Sukkot. And if they do not, then their nation, it will not rain on their nation for a year. And that is that means what that means is that their economy is going to tank for a year, because if an agricultural society does not have rain, what happens? Well, they don't have any crops, and their economy fails. So that's what that would mean, is that Jerusalem would be lifted up politically and every other way, and that would become the center of governance, the center of the world. And who knows what at that point, probably the UN will be just a moot thing, because I can't see Yeshua putting up with the shenanigans of the UN or Washington, D.C., or Russia, or any other country with some of their foolishness. And so the Bible says here that there will be peace throughout the world, that they'll beat all of their weapons into plowshares, just meaning that there's not going to be the weapons of war. That will do away with the weapons of war, and then we will be making weapons of peace. We'll be making instruments of peace, of agriculture, and hopefully we can return to more of an agricultural society. That would suit me just fine, where if we grew things properly and without poisoning the world with a bunch of insecticides and herbicides, that would be great. So, and verse 5 then is it's an exhortation to follow the Lord and to usher in this time. And there is Jewish writing that talks about how that we can, by following Torah and so forth, we can usher in the redemption, the Geulah, the redemption of Israel. Okay, verse 6 says, "For you have forsaken your people, the house of Jacob, for they are filled with soothsayers from the east, and they have clapped hands with the children of foreigners. Their land also is full of silver and gold, nor is there any limit to their treasures. Their land also is full of horses, nor is there any limit to their chariots. Their land also is full of idols. They worship the work of their hands, what their own fingers have made. So humanity bows down as each one lowers himself. Pardon them not. So this is what we have here is a failure. Well, it's, I started to say a failure to communicate. No, what we have here is a problem of self-sufficiency. And there's several facets of Israel's national life, and every bit of it is evidence of self-sufficiency rather than trust in the Lord. Now, I wanted you to look back at those verses there that where it's talking about what do they have there in the land. It says that they are filled with soothsayers or witchcraft and divination and that sort of activity. And then when it says they have clapped hands with the children of foreigners, there's a lot of speculation as to what that means. And I've read, I don't know how many different commentators on that as to what that would mean. And I think one that I liked was that they've kind of accepted the ways of the foreigners, and where that you know how when little kids do that hand clap game where like that, and this whatever, however they do that. I could get my granddaughter to do that probably and show me how that's done. But basically what you've done, you've accepted the games of the foreigners. And so there again, they have taken the foreign gods into their land. It says their land is full of silver and gold, and nor is there any limit to their treasures. So they've got a lot of money. And that goes back to the idea of what Yeshua said, that it's hard for a rich man to get into heaven because why? He relies on his money. He doesn't have to rely on the Lord so much. And so their land is full of silver, gold, and there is just no limit to their treasures. They have everything that they want and need. So it says their land is also full of horses, nor is there any limit to their chariots. Now, what that would indicate was the land are full of military hardware. And so that everywhere you look is, military and might and strength. And that's, something that's very important for a lot of people in a lot of countries, is to amass military strength so that, number one, they can defend themselves against their neighbors, their enemies, and number two, so they can also oppress and keep their thumb on their own populace. Because if they have a strong military, a strong police state, and so forth, they can, or an IRS, they can put their thumb on the people and keep them doing what it is that they want them to do. So going on with that, they said their land is full of idols, and that's its own problem right there. They worship if you can imagine, they worship the works of their hands. That becomes their idol, or that becomes their god. And they have basically gotten to the point where they are so self-sufficient that they have no need of God. And so that was part of the sin of Israel, and that's compared with what the first 5 verses, their first 4 verses actually, where Israel is going to be the center of the world, and people are going to come and learn of God and worship there and so forth. But then he jumps right back into, okay, but first we have to deal with this problem here. And so he's going on talking about why they're going to be going through some difficulties. So let's go ahead to verse 10. We'll have to hurry because I do know that I've got like 4,000 words in my notes, and that is basically more than an hour. All right, so enter into the rock and hide in the dust for fear of Adonai and the glory of his majesty. The man of haughty eyes is humbled, the lofty ones brought low, for Adonai alone will be exalted in that day. So verses 10 through 21 are a poem of the nature and the results of divine judgment. Now there's some key, repetition of key words and phrases at the beginning and the ends of the section, but it breaks down sort of like this, verses 10 to 17. The Lord is exalted over man and the world. And then 10 and 11, the verses 10 and 11, the fact that the Lord is exalted and man is humbled. And then the demonstration that the Lord is exalted over every exalted thing. So you had the fact that he's exalted, the demonstration that he's exalted, and then you see in 18 to 21 the Lord is exalted over idols, and then from 18 to 19 it's the fact that the Lord is exalted over idols and man. And so then you have in verses 20 and 21 the demonstration that the Lord is exalted, or the example of the Lord being exalted and all of the idols being exposed. So in verses 10 and 11 there, so the proud and the lofty, haughty people would eventually try to hide from God's judgment when he exalts himself in that day of reckoning. Then we're maybe talking about, again, in the millennial period after the Great Tribulation. And so having boasted of all of their wealth, and the Bible talks about that they had silver and gold, and that and it says there's no end to their treasury. They relied on that rather than on God. Now, and Rich said, could it be said that Isaiah 20:10 through 21 has eschatological overtones, looking forward to the opening of the sixth seal in Revelation 6:12 to 17? I think it could, because this all points toward the end times. It does all of these things. The time where Israel is exalted and Jerusalem is exalted, that certainly is in the millennial period, but then you have the lead up to that. And so, yes, I think the sixth seal could very easily be in view in these verses. And so here they're talking about the proud and the lofty will be brought low. That our what is the saying that goes that pride comes before the fall, and it says that God himself will be exalted against all of their sin. He's going to turn up against them in just about every way. So let's look at verse 12 here. For the day of Adonai Tzvaot will be against anyone proud and haughty, against anyone lifted up. He will be humbled. Against all the cedars of Lebanon, that are lofty and lifted up, against all the oaks of Bashan, against all of the high mountains, against all the exalted hills, against every high tower, against every fortified wall, against all the Tarshish ships, and against all the luxury boats. The pride of man will be humbled, the arrogance of man abased, for Adonai alone will be exalted in that day. All right, so what do we have here? So the day of the Lord, obviously is a prominent theme in the prophets. So you have it in Amos and Joel and Zephaniah, Zechariah, Malachi, and So it appears that this phrase, the day of the Lord, must have been used popularly during those days to denote a time when God would vindicate his people and he would bless their endeavors. But the prophet's words was that the day of the Lord would be a time of destruction and terror, and only after that time could blessing come. So the prophets then they needed to basically disabuse the Israelites of the idea that merely because they were called God's children, God's chosen people, that they deserved his favor. There you have that word deserve. And as many of you know how I feel about some of these commercials that say, get the night's sleep that you deserve, get the chair that you deserve, get, all of that kind of stuff. And I say, well, you only deserve those things if you are fortunate enough to have a good job and you work at it hard enough and long enough that you can save up a little money and then you buy it. Then I'll say that you deserve it, but you don't deserve it just because, you're good looking, or just you deserve it because they want to sell you something. So the idea that Israel deserved God's favor because they were his chosen people is erroneous, and they had to actually live out what God told them to do. Then they would be eligible. I'm not going to say that they would be deserving of his blessings, but they would be eligible for his blessings if they were to follow his commandments, his Torah. So but it tells us here that all the riches, they're going to be destroyed or just made worthless. And like when we say we got a lot of money in the stock market, well, that can be gone in a day. Look at all the people that put a lot of money into the cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and whatever it was that fuzzy-headed dude built to them out of money, and then what? It's gone. Fortunes. I mean, people lost their life savings trying to enhance their 401k or whatever it is that they were doing, and it can be gone in overnight, as was the I think the guy's name Bankman-Fried or something like that. So that riches can be gone. We saw in the 29 stock market crash that almost overnight fortunes were wiped out, and people lost everything that they had because they all bought on margins and they were betting against things that they had no business doing. So so then it talks about how that these idols, the high places, the fortifications, the trees of Bashan, the ships of Tarshish, that was a highly commercialized area, and they had lots of ships and that plied the Mediterranean Sea. And then they said even the luxury boats. Well, evidently that's pointing at the idea that the very wealthy would have mega yachts built for them, kind of like what we have today, isn't it? That we have these mega yachts being built by people that their own private yacht is bigger than it's probably got more floor space in that private yacht than most of us have in our entire property, especially if you live in a city, in the city, and your property is the standard. You got a big lot if it's a quarter acre instead of some of these things. Lots are about 1/10 of an acre, and so even back in those days, the luxury yacht was a status symbol for people, and all of those will be gone. And so I wanted to say here that God is not against nature, but he's using the imagery here of the oaks of Lebanon and so forth, as those were mighty, they were awesome. They're kind of like our live oaks today in some ways, or our redwoods, trees that you look at them and you go, wow. we've got a few of those on our property here. These live oaks that it would probably take 4 or 5 men putting their arms together to reach around the trunk of the tree, and it spreads out 60 more than 60 feet in diameter. In fact, it's probably a whole lot more than that. I just haven't gone out there with a tape measure, but it's big. And so we've got several of them like that on the property, and they're awesome. They're just awesome trees. And so God is saying, even I could go up against those, and prevail, just like I'm going to go up against your sin and will prevail. So, and I am, like I said, I'm kind of rushing through some of these notes that I've got here, because we've got a lot to cover to try to get through two chapters in the night. Verse 18 says, the idols will completely pass away. People will go into the caves of the rocks and into the holes of the earth because of the fear of Adonai and the splendor of his majesty, when he arises to shake the earth. In that day, a man will cast away his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they made to worship, to the moles and to the bats. They go into the clefts of the rock and the crevices of the crags, because of fear of Adonai and the splendor of his majesty, when he arises to shake the earth. So, idols will completely pass away. Okay, these idols they're a means by which people, they sought to basically deify themselves. They would be cast aside. People will look at these things that, in some cases, they made the idols themselves. They put them together. They had the idols, and they'll just throw that away. And it said that they would they'd throw it to the bats and the moles. Well, what's the bats and the moles? Okay, for the Jews, the bats are unclean animals. Moles are unclean animals. And so they were just throwing these idols right there to the unclean animals. It'd be like what's the deal? Throwing your pearls before swine. And so the people of Israel there that had made the idols, and then they realized, I made this with my own hands, and it's worthless. They look on the bottom of it and said, made in China. And like, I've seen a lot of Judaica that in Israel, and also that we buy here in the States, and you look at it, and on the bottom of it, you got this great beautiful menorah, and on the bottom it says made in China. Who knows? So but the people, it says, will hide themselves in caves and holes in the ground. Now, where would that be? Are there enough caves out there? Well, I think you could look at the canyons of New York City, where the high-rise buildings create these man-made canyons, and you go inside those things. Well, that would be like hiding in a cave and going underground in into the subways or in the basements. And we have a lot of people nowadays. There's been a revival of the 1950s, 60s bomb shelter thing, where people were going out and building bomb shelters in their backyard so that they could survive a nuclear blast. Well, yeah, you might survive the nuclear blast, but can you store a year or two worth of food in this bomb shelter that people built, or did they have a system to get rid of their refuse, from their bodily functions? They got that stacks up an awful lot of manure there in those things, and water. Where are you going to keep enough water in these things? So people built those things, but it was pretty much useless. That you could survive the initial blast possibly, but then you die a slow, agonizing death. And so, if it was me, okay, I'll take the quickie where you don't even realize you're gone until you're gone, and rather than the slow, agonizing death. But these people, again, were going to throw away what had been precious to them, their idols. What does that mean for us today? Looking at people that we make our own idols in many cases, where for some people it's their 401ks, it's their pension plan, or it may be their real estate holdings, where you keep getting more and more and more, the bigger house, and the more property, and the bigger house, to the point that it becomes an idol to you. That's what you're tied down to, and it robs you. These huge houses. I have a friend who had a house, and his wife wanted something more, and so she, they were in the oil field with me, and he had a pretty good amount of money. And so what they did was they built a mansion around the house that they had, and call them these little McMansions in Houston. And he told me last time, when we were still working together, that his taxes were like $25,000 a year for taxes, over $2,000 a month in taxes. That's not counting any mortgage that he may have had or something. Well, I never lived in a house that had a $2,000 mortgage, much less $2,000 a month taxes. And so and shoot, nowadays people have cars. There's another idol for you. People have cars that probably my first 4 or 5 houses that I bought when we bought and sold a house every 2 years when we were in the Coast Guard. First 4 or 5 houses that we had, cars are more expensive than those houses were. So those are idols that people have. And so, we could go on and on and on and talk about that, but eventually all of that's going to be thrown away. The people of Israel will throw those away. And I don't know how in the world we're ever going to get through this. So anyway, people are, they're being basically turned into troglodytes. Cavemen, they're going back into the caves, and their ambition to be God, their own gods, with their money and so forth, it just robbed them of a dignity that was rightfully theirs, because they're a creation of God. Had they submitted to God in recognition of his greatness to rule in their lives, then they would have been his friend. You'd have been a friend of God. And basically a little bit less than God himself in dominion over the creation. So here's a paradox for you, that to attempt to exalt yourself is to become nothing, adrift in a meaningless universe, in dread over nameless horrors which threaten us. To submit to the exalted Lord, though, is to know ourselves picked up, declared his child, and made vice regent of the universe, my Father's home. That's a quote from Dr. Oswalt, the one that I'm using his book. I thought that was a very, very good quote. So finally, the last verse in chapter 22 says, stop trusting in mankind, whose breath is in his nose. For what is he really worth? So this particular passage, okay, it's not talking about idols per se. It didn't say get rid of the idols or be done with idols. It says be done with man. Idolatry is a result, not a cause. And so it's when this, we keep exalting ourselves and getting the bigger house, the more fancy car, the bigger bank account, and all those things that we lift ourselves up. That becomes our idol. And so we tend always to make ourselves the center of the universe, and we look at everything else as just peripheral, but we are the center, and we define everything as for us being the center of everything. So and that's kind of where, why we got into the situation that Israel was in. And I look at the same thing that they're talking about. We're going to get more into it now in chapter 3. That how does that really? It just reflects what I see every day in our news. Well, nobody reads newspapers, but on your websites every day. So let's go ahead and it says one thing I liked about that, where it says that whoops, come on here. Stop trusting in mankind, whose breath is in his nose. What does that mean? This means that you're just one breath away from non-existence. That you're if you quit breathing, you could just die the next instant. And so I had a doctor tell me one time that if I didn't take some measures in my own health, he said, one of these days you're just going to wake up dead. And so I didn't care for that alternative right there. So we made some changes, and it was a good change. So, all right, going into chapter 3 now, we really have to rush. It says, for behold, the Lord Adonai Tzvaot takes from Jerusalem and from Judah supply and support, every supply of bread and every supply of water. So this, when it says for, behold, that kind of ties this section to the argument that was made in chapter 2, from verse 6 down to 22. And so in Hebrew, the behold, the word behold that we translate here is the Hebrew is hine. It commonly introduces a threat in prophetic material. Okay, the multiple names of God here that he used: the Lord God, Lord Adonai Tzvaot, the Lord, the sovereign God of hosts. Now that kind of hints at the judgment that's coming, and so God was going to remove what was essential from Judah and Jerusalem. The supply, mashen, and support, mashena, are masculine and feminine forms of the same word in Hebrew, meaning if you look in the King James Version, it talks about the staff, that in turn, where we say the supply, but the staff suggests every type of support would be removed, and the figures of the bread and the water, that stands for food and drink. Famine will come to Israel, but in a larger, more global sense, these are everything that is necessary for the nation. So that's what he said, that everything is going to be taken from Israel. And going on, it says, mighty man and man of war, judge and prophet, fortune teller and elder, captain of 50, and man of rank, counselor, crafty magician, and cunning charmer. Okay. It says that the Lord is going to take away the great men, including military leaders, the mighty man, warrior, captain of 50, political leaders, the judge, the elder, the man of rank, counselor, religious leaders like prophets, diviners, the one who knows charms, and skilled craftsmen. And so this is exactly what took place in when Assyria conquered the northern tribes, and then later on when Babylon conquered Judah and Jerusalem. Any of the leaders who could start stirring up rebellion after the conquering army had passed on, they were deported, and then they were replaced by puppet leaders, people that could be controlled. And so there's just lots of those kind of leaders. They took out Daniel and his three friends there, and of course Ezekiel was taken out, Ezra, Nehemiah, those guys, they were religious leaders. They did take out the kings and put their own leaders in place, and so that's kind of like how power in those days was passed on. They would take a guy out and put somebody else in who they liked better. So it says, I will set children as their leaders, as their rulers. Capricious ones will govern them. The people will oppress one another, each one by his fellow, each one by his neighbor. The child will be insolent to the aged, and the base to the honorable. So when people commit themselves into the hands of human leaders, the result is a disaster. The prophets sense that of the contrast here is really clear. Judah will go from mighty men to a child. In other words, they're going to lose good governance, if they had good governance to begin with. That could be argued. That then they would go from a good governance down to idiots in charge. The insane running the insane asylum, and in some cases, after the exile, that may literally have been true, because teenagers may have taken over some leadership roles simply because there was no one else. But probably Isaiah was talking more figuratively that Judah would be ruled by incompetence. In fact, at that time, it already was being ruled by incompetent people. So the nation brings on its own official graft and self-serving and irresponsibility. And so, the idea that when you don't have money in the treasury, and then you go out and spend money that you don't have, and you just print more money, that is, in my mind, incompetence. It's criminal. And somebody's going to have to pay for that someday. And so I was reading through these things, and my goodness, I was just so struck by what Isaiah was prophesying for Israel in the end times as to what is happening in the United States right now. Are we in the end times? If we're not in the end times, you can see its headlight coming at you. And so it's just amazing how some of these things that we're seeing are upon us right now. People that are elected to office that can't string one sentence after another, and when they do speak garbled words, and just amazing stuff that's going on right now in our own country. And so I just say, God help us, because we're in a bind here, folks. It says children will be taught disrespect. I put that out there, that in our own school systems nowadays, I can remember my own children, of course, years ago now, because they're all grown up and have their own children. But how teachers would say, well, if you're, we had teachers up there in Washington, D.C. that told our kids that if your parents ever yell at you or try to discipline you, you need to call CPS, because they have no right to discipline you at all. You are a grown person. You're a real person. No one has the right to tell you what to do. That's what they were teaching the kids. Even this would have been 30 years ago, I guess, something like that. So, and so we can look at what Isaiah is talking about here, that lack of leadership would result in incompetent individuals seeking and gaining positions of authority. We still see it today. Verse 4 is reminiscent of the reign of King Rehoboam. Then looking forward, looking ahead, wicked King Manasseh, probably the most wicked person, wicked king of all that ever ruled over Judah. And he started when he was 12. And, all of these guys, Jehoiakim and Joachim and Zedekiah, all those guys that followed him, they were just as wonky as he was. They were, they reigned on a whim. And so, anyway, going ahead. When a man takes hold of his brother in the house of his father and saying, "You have a cloak, you are our ruler. This ruin is under your charge." So in that day he will protest, saying, "I'm no healer. In my house is no bread or cloak. Don't make me a ruler of people." And what they're saying here is that leadership is going to get to the point where they will try to foist it off on somebody else so that they would be left holding the bag, as it were. And so then the people that they try to foist the leadership on says, "Whoa, not me. I don't want any part of this." And so it's just going to be a disaster. They'll come in there and say, "I'm no leader or no healer. I don't have any resources. I don't have any bread. I don't have a cloak. And so don't make me the ruler of the people. I don't want it." And so, a person that does not want to be a ruler should not be a ruler for the most part. Now, I know some people would rather not. George Washington was one of those individuals that he would rather have not been he wanted to go back home and raise tobacco and cotton and experiment with breeding breeding horses and making mules, these giant mules that he had. And so he would rather have done that, but they asked him to be the president. And so he did reluctantly, and he turned out to be a very, very good president. So people, it does happen, but it's not something like today where people will cut your throat to get into political office. Because why? Because it means financial gain for them. It has nothing to do with any altruistic, I want to do better for the world and for the, all that kind of foolishness. They sound like Miss America contestants. So anyway, going ahead, verse 8, "For Jerusalem has stumbled and Judah is fallen, for their tongue, their actions are against Adonai, defying the eyes of glory." All right, this is why this is all happening now. Judah and Jerusalem, they turned their back on God. Their deeds and their actions, their words and their deeds are against God. So that's why these conditions will exist, because they've turned against God. Our own country, we've turned against God in many ways, and so we can expect that kind of thing that they're prophesying for Israel. We can expect it here also. "The expression of their faces bears witness against them. They display their sin like Sodom. They do not hide it. Oy, their souls, for they brought evil on themselves." Okay, so instead of bowing down before God's glorious face, these Israelites, they were, they had these, holier than thou faces, I would call it then. They they just look at you like politicians today. When they just look at you and you point out their foibles and they just look at you like, so what, and that's what these people are doing. And they're not held accountable for many of the things that they do. For almost nothing that they do are the politicians of both parties held responsible, held accountable for what they do. And that's what they're talking about here in this in this passage. They got this haughty face, just I call it, a slap me face, where you just want to just nail them. They don't care about their sin. It says that they're just like Sodom. But he said their soul is in danger. And when it happens, when destruction happens to them, when the punishment happens to them, it's going to be a self-inflicted wound on them. Just you can count on it. Say to the righteous, he will be well, eating the fruits of their disease. Oy, of their deeds. Oy, the wicked, it will be bad for him, for the dealing of his hand will be done to him. Here, this minority of people, the righteous people, there were righteous people in Israel, in Judah at the time. They will eventually be rewarded, and but sadly, it may not be in this lifetime. Sometimes the rewards that we garner are going to be in the Olam Haba, the world to come, not in this world. And I tell people all the time that my job is this, rabbi, congregation leader, and so forth. I said the pay isn't very much. In fact, I don't take a salary, but the retirement benefits are out of this world. So I don't expect much out in today's world, but I do look at it as laying up treasures in heaven. So God is not going to forget the righteous people. Just count on it, and you will be rewarded. And again, the unrighteous, they're going to get what's coming to them, and it's going to be a self-inflicted wound. Now, Isaiah is he's bemoaning here. It says, my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. My people, your guides mislead you and destroy the way of your paths. Adonai arises to contend a case and stands to judge the people. Adonai will enter into judgment with the elders of his people and with the princes. You have devoured the vineyard. The plunder of the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people and grinding the face of the poor, says Adonai Elohei Tzvaot. All right, so Isaiah now is going, oh man, this is happening against our people, and incompetent people are going to be ruling them and leading them astray. But God is the ultimate judge here, and he's going to convict these evil rulers, and these unrighteous rulers eventually will be condemned. Okay, and so that's all I can say. Sometimes when I look at these guys up in Washington and Austin or other places, wherever your state is, that eventually they will come to judgment for their oppression over God's people. And so it's just, it's coming one day. It's not for me to judge, but God will do the judging. And I'm not going to comment on the idea that women are ruling, and that's whether or not that's good or that's bad. Okay, so all right. So in here, verse 16. Moreover, Adonai says, since the daughters of Zion are proud and walk with outstretched necks and seductive eyes, walking and mincing as they go, making a jingling with their feet, therefore Adonai will smite with a scab the forehead of the daughters of Zion. Adonai will expose their secret parts. So the high society women, they're running around, they got their nose in the air, just looking down. If it rained, they would drown, that their nose is so high in the air. And they pride themselves on their seductive prowess. How often do we see this in say in Hollywood, where people have made idols out of these people? They actually even call them idols, cinematic idols or teen idols or whatever. They actually use the word idols, and they they actually do. They try and be, that sexy person that can seduce people. And so what does it say? God will punish them, that scab on their forehead, that's with some kind of a disfigurement, as it were. So then it says, then in that day, Adonai will strip the finery of anklets, headbands, crescents, and pendants and bracelets, veils, headdresses, armlets, sashes, perfume, vials, amulets, rings, and nose jewels, festal robes, capes, cloaks, purses, lace scarves, fine linen, turbans, and veils. All right. So there's 21 items. Okay. That's 7 times 3. That's a full measure of these other personal decorations that they evidence pride. They're the reflection of pride. That's when you talk about pride, well, you see that picture in the dictionary. And so a lot of this stuff was very popular in Isaiah's day, and some of them are still popular today. And so many of the items originated in cultic and magic rituals. Again, these things are not wrong in themselves, but they may assume too much importance in a person's life. I have to laugh that sometimes myself or my wife will head out to go to synagogue or go to someplace, and she'll say to me something like, "Well, I'm not dressed," and I said, "What are you talking about?" She says, "I forgot my earrings or my wedding band or something." And I felt that way sometimes, leaving out, and I thought, I look and I said, "Oh no, I don't have my wedding band on. I don't wear it when I'm out working outside." Okay, I lost 3 fingers by wearing a wedding band while I was working in the wood shop. So I don't want to do that again because it ruined my whole afternoon. So the jewelry is not the problem, it's the attitude of the person. Okay, so here are 2 examples. Maybe they're examples, I don't know. There were a whole lot more pictures that I could have picked that when I pulled up something like this: women, jewelry, Middle East, and this is kind of what I came up with. Then I pulled up women, Middle East, seductress. None of those could I show you. Okay, I clicked off of those pretty quickly because it was not fit for such tender eyes as mine. All right, so but here you're talking about the gold and so forth. Again, are any of these things evil in themselves? No, it's the attitude of the person. And perhaps this young girl here, she's getting ready for her wedding or something, and it's a time for joy and so forth. Is that sin? No, it's not. But what Isaiah was talking about is the idea of wearing so much jewelry that you're just lording it over poor people that don't have anything. All right. So final verse. Now it will come to pass, instead of sweet spices, there will be rottenness; instead of a sash, rags; instead of curled hair, baldness; instead of fine clothing, sackcloth; and branding instead of beauty. Wow. Disgrace and ruin is the result of trusting in yourself, this self-aggrandizement, rather than trusting in God. So it's just all of those things, spices. It's going to just go to ruin is what it's going to be. Everything will be in ruin. All right, and so finally, we're getting down. Okay, I've said finally a couple of times, haven't I? Never mind. Your men will fall by the sword, and your warriors in battle. Her gates will lament and mourn. Desolate, she will sit on the ground. This gives me a picture of total defeat, utter defeat, and a war that's going to claim millions of lives, and we know that it will. And the women will be left desolate, without hope. Most wars, they decimate the male population, long before the female population. And in those days, in the days of let's see what it's got there on it. I can't read that stuff. But there was a king, a Roman ruler. And here is Vespasian. It's when Vespasian was the ruler of Rome, and they had a coin that, and there's several of them been found. I saw many examples of this, showing a woman in total despair under a palm tree with a Roman standing over her, and that says Judea Capta. And so that means that Judea being a captive, and so they even had coins about that. So finally, says 7 women will grab hold of one man in that day, saying, "We will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by your name. Take away our reproach." So the war, it will be so bad in those days. The population of men is going to be depleted, and then there will be 7 women to one man. That'll be the ratio, 7 to 1, and the women will agree to just take care of their own needs, and the man would not have to supply their needs or do anything for them, which is totally against how the biblical way to do things is, because it's a partnership, but the man should be the primary breadwinner in most cases. And the women, they said, well, they will do anything if the guy will just marry them, so that they would get rid of the stigma of being an old maid. And back in those days, that was a real deal. In today's world, not so much. Women kind of go and do their own thing, but it's still, we'll talk about these women, eventually there's going to be a problem, because the men of Israel will be killed in battle. It's going to happen. There will be a war in the future in which the world will be against Israel, and they will be almost totally defeated, except for when the Yeshua comes back and rescues him. And that's the point when Israel is going to say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. And that's when they're going to recognize, wow, this is the Messiah, and he just saved us. And so that is a day that's coming. All right. I have gone over 12 minutes, and so I'll open it up here. Let me go ahead and close out our what do you call that? The recordings and so forth. Hang on just a second. And all right, so go ahead. Any comments or questions?
Yeah, one thing I noticed here, and I was just impressed all throughout this chapter 3, that you have pronouncement after pronouncement after pronouncement against the disobedience, but you only have one verse in the entire chapter that says anything about the righteous, and that's verse 10, and you said yourself, I mean, there'll be good from their deeds, but I mean, there's judgment upon the entire nation, so they're probably going to end up suffering in the middle of all this too. But but in verse 9 it says that they proclaim their sin, like Sodom. They don't even hide it.
No,
they don't even hide it. And then and reading in verse 25, it talks about the condition of the women. Says in Hebrew, says teeth tachet yofi, that they would have branding instead of beauty. And I'm thinking, what do we see today that we might kind of reminds us of branding?
All these tattoos.
Yeah. And a lot of the women have more tattoos than the men do. I mean,
Yeah.
the parallels here are just very striking, I think.
Well, and that's what I kept saying, that I looked through this whole thing and I says, they could be talking about modern day United States or modern day Britain or France or Germany or all of these different places, that over the years I've had occasion to live in several of these countries, and it's all the same, just different names of the government, but you still see the same kind of foolishness among people and societies today. So yeah, it's striking, and it's also scary, because United States, while we are blessed of God, we are not God's chosen people. And so much to the chagrin of the Christian church that believes that the church has replaced Israel as God's chosen people, and that so on and so forth. But that's just not the way it is anymore. So, well, it never was.
I take it you don't ascribe to the concept of triumphalism in the church, where we're going to the church is going to be the conquering, courageous church that's going to bring about no, I don't either.
So supersessionism and replacement theology, no, I don't go along with that.
Yeah.
So but anyway, that's kind of an interesting lesson, I think, tonight, and one that's sobering for those of us who are in the United States and anywhere, that you see these kind of things going on.
That's all, folks.